Hello and welcome to the Slate Political Gabfest. November 28th, 2024, the Are These Tariffs for Real edition. I'm David Plotz of CityCast. It is Thanksgiving Day. Actually, it's the day before Thanksgiving Day for us, but you are in a tryptophan haze, perhaps, as you listen to this. Never in a tryptophan haze is Emily Bazelon of the New York Times Magazine and Yale University Law School. Hello, Emily.
Hey, David. Happy Thanksgiving. Happy
Thanksgiving. And in a haze of his own making, his own brilliance has made a haze around him, John Dickerson of CBS News. Hello, John.
Hello, David. Hello, Emily.
This week on the Gabfest, Trump announced he will have day one tariffs on Mexico, Canada, and China. Will he actually follow through on that? What would happen if he did? Then in Trump cabinet today, we're going to talk about Trump's new FCC commissioner nominee, Brendan Carr, how he could reshape media and big tech. And also maybe we'll talk more about the Department of Government Efficiency. What might it actually do? Then we'll be joined by The Atlantic's Annie Lowrey to talk about the bro economy, the three pillars of the bro economy: day trading, crypto, and sports betting, all of which look ready to thrive in a Trump administration. Plus, of course, we'll have cocktail chatter. And a reminder, although these tickets are sold out, we will be live at the Bell House in Brooklyn next week on Wednesday, December 4th for our annual Conundrum show. So if you have tickets, we can't wait to see you at that show. Again, Wednesday, December 4th in Brooklyn.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. The holidays mean more travel, more shopping, more time online, and more personal info in places that could expose you to identity theft. That's why LifeLock monitors millions of data points every second. If your identity is stolen, their US-based restoration specialist will fix it, guaranteed or your money back. Get more holiday fun and less holiday worry with LifeLock. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Hey, aren't you that PBM?
Middleman. At your service, doctor.
Don't you get rebates that save money on medicines?
Oh, PBMs like me get big rebates.
So why do patients tell me they're worried about their costs?
No one says we have to share the savings with patients.
Congress should make sure medicine savings go directly to patients, not middlemen. Visit phrma.org/middlemen to learn more. Paid for by pharma.
So this week, Trump announced, I think on Truth Social, which is, I guess, where all policy announcements are going to take place over the next 4 years, that he is planning 25% across the board day one tariffs for our closest trading partners, Mexico and Canada, ostensibly to get them to crack down on fentanyl importation and on migration, and also another 10% on all Chinese products just for kicks. So, John, Trump also this week said he was going to nominate Scott Bessent, a hedge fund manager who's like a relatively normcore Wall Street guy, as Treasury Secretary. And Bessent has basically said, oh, Trump's tariffs are just a negotiating strategy to open markets, and we're all still free traders, hint, hint, nod, nod, wink, wink. So what is it? Which is it? Is this all just like Trump making threatening noises so that Canada and Mexico will do his bidding straight up?
Yeah, I think so. Then the question is, what is his bidding exactly? So the important thing, I guess, with respect to the Treasury Secretary is the Treasury Secretary has been brought in to, quote unquote, calm markets. And the idea is that basically the bond market in particular is worried that these tariff proposals are going to increase prices and that essentially interest rates are going to go up. We've already seen mortgage rates in September are closer to 7 than they were to 6, which is where they were in September. And the idea is that the Treasury Secretary is going to tell the bond market, look, these policies aren't as inflationary as they all seem. And I would include in that probably, in addition to tariffs, also the immigration policy from Trump, and also his fiscal policy, which is basically tax cuts with questionable and certainly not offsetting spending reductions. So the question is, will the markets be settled? They appear to have been in response to Trump's naming. I would also include Howard Lutnick at Commerce, another person from Wall Street and the financial markets. That's round one, and we'll see what actually happens. I think it's kind of reminds me of what we were talking about with the Department of Justice, which is Trump has these opening bids, and it's probably best to think of them in terms of everything he does is both performative. It makes him look like, hey, look, he's already like in there, rock'em sock'em on the economy. And then secondly, they're opening bids to a later, part of a negotiation.
I find this really confusing from the point of view of coverage. I mean, it was my idea to talk about the tariffs because I saw it as like a forward-looking thing to consider. And then I felt like a sucker because, as you're saying, it's not real. And it sort of feels like by entertaining it as possibly being real, we give it attention, make it seem more real than other people knock it down, because if you were to carry it out, all the terrible market outcomes that you just laid out would actually happen. And then somehow it all just sort of lurches on to the next news cycle and there are no consequences. And it's just kind of exhausting. I'm channeling something I read by Jonathan last year, I should just say. Anyway, what do you think about that?
Well, I think, and we've talked about this before, and we talked about it even in the campaign, where you should spend your time focusing on not on the theatrics, not on the effects, but the actual effects. And I think Matt Iglesias has made that point. In this case, though, you've got both, which is one, it's performative, but two, I mean, the bond market's reacting, and that is raising rates, and that, the debt service as a part of or the interest payments, essentially, that the U.S. government makes is affected by those long-term bond rates. So it ain't nothing that now, again, yields on 30-year and 10-year treasuries have gone down, but they were very much going up as a result of anticipated behavior. Now, the interesting thing for me is whether the bond market starts to basically behave as you're saying, Emily, which is like, wake me when it happens. But on the other hand, markets are supposed to anticipate risks. And you had Walmart on their earnings call saying that they expected they might have to raise prices as a result of these tariffs. So those signals are not nothing. It's just we have to learn how to sort of talk about what's really happening, I'd say bond market, and then what's all kind of theater, which is, much of the rest of Trump.
Emily, I'm totally with you that you do end up feeling like a dupe, a sucker, because you get caught up in the threats. I mean, of course, if you run a multinational company and the incoming president, the incoming president says we're going to put tariffs on you, you kind of are in a panic, and you do need to think about, well, what would happen if he did it? And the problem with Trump is that, and this goes, I guess, to the madman theory, which he is so fond of, is you just don't know. He really did put a bunch of tariffs down in his first term. There were tariffs that did not exist in 2017 that did exist by the time he left office. And certainly the amount and the nature of those on China were much greater than people thought. And so it's entirely possible that he believes in it, like that it may actually be a core belief and that he will get his people to do it. And so it is this uncertainty. It's not a question. It's not necessarily that it's always bait and switch, because one of the things about bait and switch is you don't know when it's a bait and switch. Like sometimes it's actually for real, and so it is a head spinner for us.
I found really interesting a piece in the Wall Street Journal about Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple's ability to develop a working relationship with Trump. And in that piece was a story about the 2019 tariffs, and Apple was facing a 10% tariff on imports from China. And basically, Cook convinced Trump, according to the Journal, of what all the economists are saying now, which is that tariffs lead to higher prices for U.S. consumers. And Cook was saying that's not good for Apple. And he convinced Trump of that and therefore saved Apple the penalty that it would have incurred from the 10% tariff. But in return, Cook basically created this theatrical moment where Trump and Cook could appear in Texas, and Trump could take credit for Apple bringing more manufacturing back to the United States. And so the tariff in that case was used as leverage, not to get a foreign trading partner to give U.S. imports better terms or something else. It was basically a route for Trump to get a great piece of PR with the head of one of America's most prestigious companies.
During the first Trump presidency, we spent a lot of time saying, this is not normal. Is this normal? This is certainly not normal. And one thing that I feel has been in much less supply recently is this normal conversation. And that's because everyone's sort of like, okay, it's going to be crazy and we're just going to accept it. And all historical precedent about normality, it's just kind of out the window. So don't even bother. But I'm going to stop for one moment and just ask you this, John. Is it normal for an incoming administration to send so many policy signals with such specificity before they're even close to being in office? It seems like so crazy. It's like we have two economic policies, two foreign policies, happening right now.
Yeah, no, it's not. Usually there is a norm against doing that kind of thing. You'll remember that Trump got in trouble and his former national security advisor, Michael Flynn, got in trouble for basically starting the work of national security, including contacts with the Russians before they came into office. The most historically the historical moment that comes to mind for me is when Hoover tried to get FDR to kind of join him in sort of locking arms on economic policy after FDR had been elected and during the many months before he was inaugurated. And FDR was like, no way, man, you're going to suck this awful economy. It's going to be attached to your name. I don't want to be anywhere associated with it. So his instinct was the absolute opposite in that case. But no, I think this to me, and I'm trying now to go through my recollection, I can't think of an instance in which the only thing I guess I would say is there was the period between George W. Bush and Obama where you had the financial crisis and there was a lot of coordination. And those people involved, both Republicans and Democrats, and by Republicans, this is of a different era where there were, a considerable number of Republicans who were engaged, at least in the project of government, towards traditionally salutary goals of government. And I think that kind of distinction between what we may see in this administration probably is going to be we're going to need to make it often. But the Treasury Secretary under Bush and the incoming Obama team, they did work together on that kind of handoff, giving, and also the Federal Reserve was involved, given the precarious nature of the economy at that time.
Working together, of course, being not what is happening now.
Yes.
Hey, aren't you that PBM?
Middleman, at your service, doctor.
Don't you get rebates that save money on medicines?
Oh, PBMs like me get big rebates.
So why do patients tell me they're worried about their costs?
No one says we have to share the savings with patients.
Congress should make sure medicine savings go directly to patients, not middlemen. Visit phrma.org/middlemen to learn more. Paid for by pharma.
How about listening to the sounds of Istanbul? Beautiful, isn't it? But you can't discover the coolest city in the world just by listening. Check istanbul.goturkiye.com now and plan your Istanbul trip today.
Time to move? Skip the hassles of selling during the holiday season and sell your home directly to Opendoor. Request an all-cash offer in minutes, close, and get paid in days. You can even pick your close date so you can move after New Year's. Start your move at opendoor.com or download the Opendoor app. Opendoor is represented by Opendoor Brokerage Inc., license 02061130 in California, and Opendoor Brokerage LLC in its other markets. Terms and conditions apply.
We are trying to stay somewhat current on the promises and implications of Trump's appointees. So we thought we'd talk a little bit about Brendan Carr, who's been nominated to lead the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission. Carr is interesting because he wrote the FCC section of Project 2025. He's told us what he wants to do as the leader of what will be a 3-2 Republican majority on the FCC. So, Emily, this touches a lot on issues that you've hit on. What are the things that the FCC might do that would have big implications for the country and especially for the media industry?
Yeah, I mean, Carr frames his critique in terms of censorship. So he is taking the idea of social media being a place that censors conservatives as a way of framing any sort of effort to address misinformation. And, this is a kind of like a through the looking glass way of thinking about what's actually happening with the social media companies, which is that, by and large, social media has been enormously beneficial to conservative influencers. That's the way the algorithms work. It is true that during COVID and also in 2020, the social media companies tried to in some way reduce the reach of false speech. And that did have the effect of sometimes reducing the reach of, right-wing posters because they were the ones posting the false speech. But it wasn't their conservative views that were being reduced in reach. It was like the things that were, seemed like a public health threat, et cetera. The whole idea that there is some neutral way to tag speech online as being false or reduce its reach is really under attack. So that's, I think, the first thing that Carr is talking about. And if he really followed through on some of these threats, you would be talking about changes. Remember that the social media companies are companies. They are private entities. They get to decide under the First Amendment what kind of speech takes place on their platforms, how to regulate hate speech, for example, in a way that allows them to keep their audiences. And this looks like either cowing them into submission so that they self-regulate, or a kind of real government interference with how they operate. Then there's Carr's separate way of talking about the broadcast licenses, in which he describes that, then this is true, that there is this at least principle that the government can in some way think about the public interest when it awards those licenses. But again, what he's talking about is making sure that conservative views will be adequately or more represented on ABC, CBS, NBC, et cetera. And it's relevant here that Fox News is not part of this licensing scheme because it's on cable where none of these public interest rules apply. So, that's the way he wrote Project 2025. It's the way he's talking, at least, about how he's going to do his job.
Emily, does the social media conversation change given well, first of all, we should just mention the fact that consistently the most passed around social media is overwhelmingly conservative. So this fact, as he declares it, doesn't seem to really exist. But secondly, social media has changed a great deal since its beginning. Twitter, for example, now has an owner who is more interested in and has taken actions to reverse this, has stepped in and shut down posts or minimized posts and that kind of thing. So, and also then I guess secondarily, is he going to be interested in like Blue Sky, which is not anything close to what old fashioned Twitter was? I'm just wondering who the target is and whether it's kind of the same thing as what he's railing against.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think that they will. That Elon Musk is doing this work himself on X, right? What you want is right-wing influence. Like, it turns out that the reason Elon Musk bought X was to create this enormous propaganda vehicle for right-wing points of view, including his own. Maybe they're more talking about Meta and Google and Apple, the other huge companies, and thinking about the roles they play in the information ecosystem, and how, again, there are many decisions they make all the time that have real implications about how far false speech travels. And if you think that, any regulation of false speech is censorship and indeed is, political biased censorship, then you want to address all of those places as well. I guess especially Meta, maybe.
This is a side note. I don't think Elon Musk bought Twitter to advance right-wing positions. I honestly don't. I think what happened is he bought Twitter in a moment when he was going through some kind of ferment, and the right was incredibly smart and opportunistic about drawing him in and finding places that would comfort him and solace him and confirm his where he wanted to go. And they pulled him in more than he was. I think he obviously has certain tendencies and intellectual tendencies, but I think he was heterodox enough that he could have gone in different directions. It's just that the right was really, really good about drawing him towards them. That's just my own take, but we don't need to talk about that. I just do want to talk about Carr and Musk, which is this. There's this other third aspect of Carr's reign at the FCC that may come out, which is that he's incredibly close personally to Musk, and he's an absolute Musk courtier and sycophant, and it is very clear that he's going to use the FCC to ensure that Musk gets what he wants, notably around Starlink, his SpaceX's massive satellite network, and that's going to be allowed to expand. That's going to be allowed to get into the phone business. It's going to be a much bigger player even than it is already, and that will almost certainly be enormously to the benefit of Musk.
And when you think about like the idea of the capitalist overlord, I mean, we already saw Starlink play this particular role in the war between Russia and Ukraine, right? Where, Musk gave Ukrainians access to Starlink and all the information that it allowed to travel, and then took it away. So, the idea of that becoming very powerful means that you have this non-government entity that in some ways has more power than many countries in the world.
Well, I was talking to a friend of mine who used to work at the FCC, and he was saying that there is this way in which you could use the FCC to really target rival power centers. Like it's supposed to be create principled rules, but if you wanted to, you can use it to go after networks. You could target SNL for parodying Trump or something, go after CNN, and you can make life really miserable for the companies that own big media companies and get them to kowtow to you. And it's a very powerful tool. And Trump really loves and knows and understands media, and he's very effective. He hates it. He hates the way he's covered by independent journalists, but he is very conscious of its power. So I expect that, unlike with the tariffs, where I think the tariffs is a thing which is mostly smoke, that actually there will be a very significant real effort to go after media businesses, because there won't be public outcry. It won't affect the markets, and it will really do the bidding of Trump. Trump really wants it done. It's something he cares a lot about. So I would not want to be, no offense to you, John, the owner of CBS right now, or the New York Times or Jeff Bezos. I just wouldn't want. It's going to be really stressful, and you're going to have either the choice to fight against a pretty implacable set of opponents or to capitulate. And that's neither of those is pleasant.
You mentioned CNN. They're not regulated by the FCC, are they, Emily?
No, they're on cable.
But their owner, their owner always wants to do business of various sorts, and you can imagine that the Trump administration would make it terrible for whoever owns CNN to do business.
Yes, you have other ways other than broadcast licenses.
Oh, sure.
Yes.
Oh, absolutely. Look, and also I think this is I called it performative earlier, but I mean, there is a category we need to find a word for that just is like activities that create public fuss that are in the service of the delights of the new president. And I think waging a war, whether it's the FCC or the SEC or the QVC, there is no QVC department. That is just, going after the enemies perceived and real of the president's, I think is, a way to stay in his good favor. And there's going to be some of that kinds of activity. Carr is already, his response to, I believe this is what I read, that his response to Harris being on Saturday Night Live was to go right to threatening the broadcast license of NBC. I mean, in other words, no interim step. So that could be in that performative category that I'm talking about.
And again, you just start trying to chill speech, right? By making moves like that, you're basically cautioning the networks, and then the next time maybe they don't do it at all.
I honestly do not understand what an attack on the media platforms would consist of. What is it that you want them to do or don't want them to do? With TikTok, it's clear, like TikTok, they want it extracted from any Chinese influence. That one I get. But what is it that they expect Facebook or Google or Apple to do? I don't know.
So with Meta, they want Instagram and Facebook, et cetera, to stop tagging posts as false that are conservative aligned.
So let it be
way.
a cesspool. Be a cesspool.
Be
you
a
have
cesspool.
to allow your platform to be a cesspool. Okay.
Right. And I mean, to a degree, the platforms are doing much less of this anyway. I mean, this was a huge fight in 2020 about information related to the election, and it sort of went away in 2024. So they've already gotten the message. But to the extent that there is still some amount of fact checking going on and the algorithms respond to it, they want that to go away.
This episode is brought to you by Etsy.
Oh.
Hear that?
Okay. Thank you.
Etsy knows these aren't the sounds of holiday gifting. Well, not the ones you're hoping for. You want squeals of delight. Happy tears.
How did you?
And spontaneously written songs of joy.
I am so happy. Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah.
Okay, the song needs a bit of work, but anyway, to get those reactions, make sure everyone on your list feels heard with handmade, handpicked, and designed gifts from small shops on Etsy. Gifts like personalized jewelry, custom artwork, cozy style items, vintage pieces, and home decor to celebrate all of your favorite people and their specific kind of special. For original gifts that say, I get you, Etsy has it.
Way to eat a tea. You're listening to an ad for PC Game Pass. Want new games on day one like Indiana Jones and the Great Circle? How about living out your Sims life with EA Play? We're talking high-quality PC games all for one low monthly price. We got you. Learn more at xbox.com/PC Game Pass or click the banner. Indiana Jones and the Great Circle available December 9th, 2024. Game catalog varies by region and over time. Okay, that's the ad. You can go back to doing whatever you were doing now.
Annie Lowrey of The Atlantic, welcome back to the Gabfest. What is the bro economy? And how does it stand to benefit from the Trump administration? And did you coin the term bro economy?
I think I didn't. I think it's not possible to come up with like a gender economy term at this point that has not been previously coined, right? I think that we've covered all of them, and we would have to look to like other languages or other kind of esoterica in order to derive new ones like she session. And anyway, I did not come up with the term bro economy. The bro economy is comprised of three elements as I see it, though there's perhaps more. It's sports betting, it's crypto, and it is meme stock trading, day trading, kind of financial small dollar trading. This is all happening on app. A lot of it is happening on the same apps. This is behavior that is enormously heavily concentrated among young men. And these are all kind of new versions of something old that has happened for a long time, with the exception of crypto, though it's at this point been around for quite a long time. And the behaviors are enormously, enormously prevalent among this cohort of people. And I think there's a lot of stories of people getting rich or having fun or doing kind of crazy things with this. But I see this as a pretty straightforward story of financial exploitation of a group of people that don't have a lot of money to lose.
Should we think of this as addictive behavior?
Absolutely. I think that if you have ever been on any of these apps, so anything like DraftKings or some of the apps that people are using to trade, these are apps that are designed to make the experience really seamless and to make it social, to make it sort of like being in a casino where you're pulling the lever over and over again. There's gamification elements. So you're getting some money for free, right? You're getting shown what your friends are doing. And so I think all of that reduces a person's sense of risk. They've removed all of the friction. So you can do this just as easily as you could, like buying something on Amazon on your phone. And we know that a lot of people will use these apps and engage in these activities, but the problem behavior gets really, really concentrated among a relatively small number of people. So you'll hear about people losing like $35,000 on strange prop bets, or having made a bunch of levered trades on Robinhood, right? So betting with not your own money, but just partially your own money on stocks. And you can really get into a lot of trouble, and people are really losing their savings. I think it's really problematic behavior, even though I think socially, especially in the case of sports betting, we don't quite want to describe it that way. But I see this as really exploitative and troubling.
Can you go in a little bit into some of the economic effects of any of these behaviors, or maybe sports betting? Haven't there been some studies that show not only is it bad for the individual person who can get into addictive behavior. But money that's going into gambling isn't going into savings, in just a person's life. And so it has an effect on the economy as well.
Absolutely. So I would imagine, say that just us here on this podcast, we're going to have like a little raffle. And so we were going to put money into a pot, and then we were going to have a raffle, and one of us was going to win it. But the person who runs the raffle is going to take a cut of the money. This is not how an economy normally works, where you're building new things and creating new value, and then money gets assigned to that new value. This is just taking our money and redistributing, and then somebody taking a cut. And in the case of like casinos and betting, that's all that's happening. I would argue in the case of crypto, that is all that's happening. No new value is being generated. They're just reshuffling the cash that exists. That's not true with betting on the public markets, but the kind of like meme stock trading has some other problematic characteristics that I would isolate out. But yeah, this is just reshuffling the cash of people, and it encourages this kind of risky, high volume behavior where, again, the house is taking a cut over and over and over again. So the more money that goes in, the more these industries benefit, and they benefit from A, people doing it really often, and B, people taking a lot of risk. It's not great. And you could say that people have fun with it. I think this is surely true with like sports betting and, everybody and doing this mostly for the most part as an adult, and, perhaps they should know what they're getting into. But yeah, they're losing money that they should be spending on groceries that they could be using to start a business or go to school. And look, like people get to spend some amount of their money on leisure and silly things, and I certainly do that. But the problem is these things are kind of addictive, and people can get into these really big, deep holes that they then want to climb themselves out of.
It's like Twitter for those who are looking to get into bankruptcy.
Yeah, exactly. It's like Twitter, but also you could like lose your entire life savings and also like maybe your mom's 401k.
I say this without any sense of exaggeration. I really do feel like it's financial fentanyl or financial oxy. Like that with sports betting, the way that I have seen it absorb young men is so disturbing, and that we're going to see, I bet there's going to be bankruptcies. There's already evidence that bankruptcies are probably rising, at least as a result, partially of this. It's damaging credit scores, but I suspect we will see people's lives literally ruined and people ending up in suicides or like in some form. There's more intimate partner violence associated with high use of sports betting, and the online sports betting is so incredibly addictive, and the tools they use are so addictive that it's just shocking. The teasers, the freebies, we're going to give you $250. We're not really giving you $250. You're not actually getting $250, by the way, guys. Just to go to the question that I have, Annie, what does this have to do with Trump? Like you've just described a set of things which are habits of young men, but why does this have anything to do with the Trump administration?
So one thing that I think is interesting is that these behaviors are not just concentrated among the same group of younger men. It's often people who are engaging in all of them, sometimes somewhat simultaneously. And I think that we are going to see crypto-friendly regulation during the Trump administration, which is interesting because previously Trump had been pretty anti-crypto, right? He was really pro-dollar. He was like, this is nothing. But he has a bunch of really strongly pro-crypto people that he's looking at for his administration. And also, now there's a Republican Congress that is likely to pass regulation that will be very pro-crypto. So what has held crypto back from being available like on your Wells Fargo app or, at sort of a mainstream financial institution is that it's not really completely clearly regulated. And so the big financial institutions that are heavily regulated have chosen not to offer a lot of crypto products. And so if you see crypto get regulated, you will see the movement of Main Street and Wall Street financial institutions into it. It's just going to be a lot more money pouring into crypto. This will, in some cases, have the effect of mechanically raising crypto prices, which will then draw other people in. But this stuff is really risky and there's nothing there. So if you're thinking about like a stock, right? Like it's attached to a company that probably has real assets, probably has real IP, might actually be making something. Whereas crypto, it's like nothing, right? It's just value attaching to these sort of numbers. And then in the case of stocks, I think that there will probably be financial deregulation in the next Trump term that will lead to more financial casino-like behavior and the light regulation of some of these services that people are using. I think there's also a pretty good case that the sports betting understanding rules that we have right now are not the right ones for the public good. It's too frictionless. It's too much money. You can do it too easily. There aren't enough safeguards. I think it's very unlikely that we will see regulation in the public interest in the public betting markets, despite the fact that there's now a lot of concern that like this is too easy, that people are too young, they're spending too much money. And notably, I mean, Emily would know more about this than I would, but my understanding is that the Supreme Court ruling doesn't preclude Congress from creating legislation that could ban this or regulate it in some other way. Though again, I'm not a lawyer.
Yes, I think you're right about that. I mean, the other thing I'm relating this to is the trouble that young men are just having generally in society and the way in which this creates another risk, even though it appears to be a pleasure center for them, right? Like it seems like something they're enjoying, they're quote choosing. And yet the way you're using the word frictionless makes me think of like just sort of starting down this very slick slide without necessarily really appreciating fully what could lie at the bottom, how this is all going to work out, and the way in which this may relate to the untethered, unvalued sense that I think a lot of young men have about themselves right now. I'm trying to make this into a question for you. I guess I'm wondering whether you thought about those issues and this kind of rising concern about this particular group.
Absolutely. I think that there's kind of like three things there that I would identify. So the first is that we know just young men are not doing particularly well relative to young women. They are not making the educational gains that young women are. They don't have a strong attachment to the labor market as young women do. In some cases, they're literally like sicker. They're physically doing worse than young women are. I also think that we're in this tough cultural moment where men have felt like they have been accused and that there's no sort of like positive form of masculinity for them attached to. I think the pendulum is sort of swinging back in this bro-y way. And I think that Trump and Musk are two of the sort of avatars of this. And I'm not even sure that I necessarily think all of that is a bad thing. And I think it's really easy to caricature, but I think that you do see these kind of like dangerous communities of incels online. And I don't know that I think that we have sort of a culturally coherent and positive vision of masculinity right now for young men to attach to. And then, yeah, this again, I think it's straightforward financial predation. So I had written for a while about crypto's exploitation of Black Americans, Black American financial communities. These are folks who have tended to be shut out from the regular financial system, more likely to be unbanked, more likely to be redlined, to be denied loans, to be denied jobs. And so there's this promise of crypto because it was coming outside of the financial system. But Black Americans bought in late and then they sold at the top of the market. So they existed to get white money out. Right? They were the marks. And we've seen that over and over and over and over and over again in Black communities. That is like a pretty consistent pattern. And I just worry that we're seeing that here. Where this is all like fun and it's about risk taking. It's about young men who I think are especially just probably in their DNA primed to be taking a lot of risk. But we don't realize that that's also just a lot of exploitation and it's being wrapped up in this kind of gaudy package of like, oh, isn't it fun? Aren't we all just shit posting? And it's like, no, they're losing real money that they don't really have the capacity to lose.
And one might as well throw in here that there's obviously an old-fashioned conflict between the evangelicals who support Trump and the former dislike among evangelicals of gambling of all sorts. And probably all three of these categories fit into that, but that's just another way in which things have changed to accommodate Trump. The actual question I'm going to ask you, Annie, is there any way in which, particularly with crypto, it can clash against Trump's concern, at least at some small level, with quote unquote settling the markets, which would be like the traditional capital markets? His pick of Treasury Secretary, his pick of Commerce Secretary. Does making it easier for crypto in the Wild West of that clash against traditional markets, and might that cause issues for him?
It could, certainly. I I definitely think that what you are seeing, the behavior I was describing of this kind of day trading, which is a very old storied activity that a lot of very careful individual investors engage in. This is kind of like investing is gambling. It's very meme driven. It's very irrational. It tends to be very short term. It's very social. And then what you see with crypto, where again, you just have a lot of folks who are making very unusual crypto trades and crypto bets. They can be very big. They can be very levered in a way that's really worrisome. My concern is that one of the reasons that Main Street and Wall Street banking institutions want to get into crypto is just that there's a place for them to take their cut from it. It's also that they can restructure themselves as crypto companies that are not subject to strict banking regulations. That's really what they want to do, right? Like they want to get into the crypto market. They also want to deregulate really badly. And if they find any way to use the new crypto rules to restructure themselves as like quote unquote blockchain companies that don't have to comply with, say, the regulations that would bar a financial institution that was doing any financial business for somebody on a terrorist watch list, this is like a real actual concern, they would do that. And, no companies, I think, are as athletic and intense and creative in working regulators in the regulatory system as Wall Street. I mean, probably there's others, but that would really be what I would worry about there. And they don't have the public interest in mind, right? They want to take as much risk as they possibly can while socializing downsides. And so that's what I would expect them to do, because their behavior is very predictable about all of this. And they don't care about these guys. They don't, right? And it hasn't, in the case of, I feel like especially both sports gambling and crypto, I know people talk about some upside, right? There's all this money to be made in crypto. Oh, gambling. Otherwise, it would be an underground activity and people are going to do it otherwise. But I still don't think that comes close to justifying the regulatory regimes that we have right now. This is all very straw manish. And I think there's really clear cases for stronger regulation to protect people who don't have a lot to lose.
Before we let you go, Annie, I don't know if any of you guys saw this really interesting story in the Post about online sweepstakes. Basically, there's a set of online casinos, and you can play casino games, and you're supposed to be able to play for free. And you can play for free, and these are app games. But they've come up with this way to offer sweepstakes where you're paying for like a little bit of slightly difference, and it allows these online casinos to basically get you to spend a ton of money to play these games with a vague chance that you could win. And it's a completely unregulated market. It's all done, or it's mostly done by this Australian company, VGW. And they're now Americans spending something like $4 billion a year on this. They don't verify age. They don't verify identity. There is literally no regulations on it. It's just a pure extraction device. It's like mindless risk-taking, no benefit. And it's done by shady Australians. So it's not just sports gambling where this is happening. It's happening in all sorts of other ways.
I keep on coming back to, right? Like Trump made all this money or did or didn't, right? From casinos. He's like literally a casino magnate, as well as a guy who's been in all kinds of shady financialized industries. He's this guy. And now he's, like Doge, the supposed Department of Government Efficiency. All they're talking about is reducing regulations willy-nilly. We've seen this play out so many times. It's a very, very classic playbook. I think if you go look at the Project 2025 stuff on deregulation, it's interesting how it collides with some of the more kind of Christian right moralism. But my sense is that the people with the money will win.
It also reminds me of high-risk loans, like the argument for them, people need these loans. They're necessary to greasing the economy, and poor people can't afford to, have low credit ratings. And yet, people get ruined by them.
Annie Lowrey of The Atlantic. Her story is The Bro Economy. Thanks, Annie.
Thanks for having me.
Let's go to cocktail chatter. When you're tired of day trading and sports betting and just want to have a drink, Emily, and civilized conversation, what are you going to be chattering about?
I have been feeling like I should pour one out this weekend for Jack Smith, the prosecutor in the Trump cases. He did the legally required and right thing by ending the federal prosecution of Trump in Washington, and the Mar-a-Lago case about the documents in Florida will surely come to its own end soon as well. He didn't have a choice about this. The Department of Justice has a policy that you don't prosecute sitting presidents, and I think that just is common sense. I feel like Jack Smith just was given a tremendously bad hand. It took a couple of years for Attorney General Merrick Garland to let him get going. Then he kind of did his prosecutorial thing, where when you're the prosecutor and you see crimes, you figure out a way to charge those crimes. But it was controversial from the beginning, especially the cases in Washington about January 6th were using a fairly novel legal theory. Of course, there were all kinds of obstacles. And then, that case ended up with a kind of be careful what you wish for outcome in the Supreme Court, the very broad immunity ruling for presidents that we had last summer, which will make it much harder for future prosecutors to try to address wrongdoing in the White House. And there's just, we're going to look back on this set of decisions that were Biden administration decisions, independent prosecutor decisions for a long time and wonder about whether we would have been better off without having these cases at all, or maybe just the Mar-a-Lago case, which was narrower and kind of clear in its legal trajectory. What if that case had not been assigned to Judge Aileen Cannon in Florida, who seemed determined to do the most Trumpy thing possible all along? It's just like a set of bad outcomes and bad timing. And it has left the rule of law in the United States weakened, I think. Though, I don't know, maybe I'm being stubborn not to lay more of that at the feet of Jack Smith himself, but it just seems like he was surrounded by other actors and forces.
Emily, will Smith issue a final report to Garland, and could Garland make that public? And is that why you want to resign under the Garland administration rather than be fired by the Trump administration?
Yes, I think all of those things are likely to happen. And that is why Smith has not already resigned, because obviously he's going to do that. And Trump and his Attorney General nominee, Pam Bondi, replacing Matt Gaetz, have made it clear that his whole team is at risk. And I'm sure they will all clear out of the Justice Department before Trump goes into office.
And they'll all be audited, and guess what piddling ass crime Jack Smith is going to be charged with next year. It's ridiculous.
Right. It is really, yeah.
John Dickerson, what is your chatter?
My chatter is about a Macy's employee that somehow...
Oh, my goodness.
And there's a mystery here. And I don't know whether, David, you've read about this and understand the answer to this mystery. But basically, Macy's announced this week that an employee had intentionally misstated and hidden up to $154 million in delivery expenses over the past few years. And this was such a big miss and such a big problem that they had to delay their earnings report to Wall Street, which matters because Macy's has been on the ropes, and this is an important signal or thing that these earnings reports are what Wall Street looks for. But the reason it's a mystery is I in all the reading I've done, I cannot figure out why this was done. Whether it was just didn't want to deal with the hassle of accounting for this, why the hiding took place. It doesn't, and Macy's hasn't announced it, of course, because they're embarrassed that they missed this. Why did it take place? Was there personal gain involved? And if so, how did that happen? So anyway, it's a mystery.
Yeah, it's such a mysterious story. It does remind me, I think there's a whole category of, I guess they are crimes, misdeeds that happen when you just kind of get overwhelmed. So about 30 years ago, I think I've told this before in the Gabfest, about 30 years ago, all of a sudden, my parents began getting huge deliveries of third-class mail, like catalogs, but it was they were old catalogs and dirty catalogs and old fundraising. And what had happened is that our postal delivery person had just stopped delivering third-class mail and had kind of buried it in his backyard. And that was a crime. And he'd ended up going to prison for burying third-class mail that nobody wanted, honestly. And then they redelivered it. And I just felt this poor person was it was just somehow too much. One day he was I'm not going to deliver the third-class mail, and just brought it home. And it just spiraled. And I bet I bet when they dig into this thing, if it's not personal, if it's not somehow a personal gain, it's because like the person just got overwhelmed by some set of accounting that was required to do this and just gave up on it.
Right. And they went to their supervisor for months beforehand and said, this 19-part process to account for these delivery fees, it's totally backwards and we got to find a better way. And the person above them said, no.
Yeah. My chatter is about a sci-fi podcast I've been listening to. It's actually from 2020 or 2021. I'm loving it so much. It's called Dust Chrysalis. So I think Dust is the overarching name of the series, and Chrysalis is the particular space opera I'm listening to. And it's about a man-made artificial intelligence seeking vengeance against the aliens who've destroyed humanity. And it is so gripping. It's so fun. It's all I want to do is listen to it. I really recommend it. Dust Chrysalis, especially if there's a lot of fighting, there's a lot of space battles and that kind of stuff. So if you don't like space battles, don't listen to it. Listeners, thanks for emailing your chatters to us at gabfest@slate.com. We really appreciate all the good ideas that you have, the things that you're chattering about, perhaps at your Thanksgiving today. And our chatter this week comes from Milner Fuller.
Hello, Gabfest listeners. My name is Milner Fuller from Indianapolis. My chatter concerns our Lieutenant Governor-elect Micah Beckwith, who recently threatened the Indiana Daily Student, the venerable student-run newspaper at Indiana University, with state action in response to a cover it ran after the election. The November 7th IDS front page featured unsavory quotes about Donald Trump from his former allies, which apparently triggered Mr. Beckwith, a megachurch pastor who calls himself a Christian nationalist. Beckwith posted a picture of the IDS cover on X, along with some of his thoughts. Quote, "Your tax dollars at work," and "woke propaganda." The post concludes, "This type of elitist leftist propaganda needs to stop, or we will be happy to stop it for them." In an interview with the IDS's Mia Hilkowitz, Beckwith accused the IDS of, quote, "using taxpayer dollars to silence the conservative viewpoint," and said, quote, "That's going to stop." Hilkowitz then explained that the IDS is independent from Indiana University and does not receive any direct taxpayer funding. The entire episode was a vivid display of the governor-elect's ignorance and contempt for journalism and the First Amendment. His comments are part of a larger campaign against independent journalism that apparently even extends to the level of student-run newspapers.
That's all for our episode this week, but we also have a bonus episode in your feed. The bonus episode is a very inspirational bonus episode about what kind of jobs are the most fulfilling kind of jobs. We were inspired by an interesting data project in the Washington Post to try to figure out what fulfilled people in work. That, however, is only for Slate Plus members. If you are a Slate Plus member, thank you. You get these bonus episodes. You get discounts to live shows like our Conundrum show next week. You get unlimited reading on the Slate site, so much more. But if you're not a member, you can go subscribe directly from the Political Gabfest show page on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify, or you can visit slate.com/Gabfest Plus to get access. That's all for our Thanksgiving show today. The Gabfest is produced by Cheyna Roth. Our researcher is Julie Huygen. Our theme music is by They Might Be Giants. Ben Richmond is Senior Director for Podcast Operations. And Alicia Montgomery is the VP of Audio for Slate. For Emily Bazelon and John Dickerson, I'm David Plotz. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next week.
On November 7th, Thundercat, Karasoft, and NVIDIA teamed up to host a discussion with leading government panelists to speak on best practices and challenges agencies are facing with AI. Learn how we can plan to navigate complex policy landscapes, assess agency needs, and contribute to shaping the future of AI applications in the government. You can now tune into the conversation on the Feds at the Edge podcast, streaming on all major platforms. Visit thundercattech.com/events for more info. That's thundercattech.com/events.